Welcome to Beyond Better, a podcast that explores a simple but profound idea. We all deserve to live lives we love, and that includes our work lives too. I'm Stacy, Ennis, an author and longtime location-independent entrepreneur living in Portugal with my family of 4. Join me as I talk business, location independence, writing, travel, and so much more. All focused on building a life that is beyond better. Welcome. I am so excited to be here with you this week to talk about an important topic, something that is really, really near and dear to my heart. And this is an episode that I've been meaning to record for a while, but I really needed to be in the right headspace to talk about it. And so today I went on a run. I got myself centered and present so that I could have a conversation with you all about the state of equity in publishing. So that's what we're going to dive into today. Before we do, I just want to give you a little bit of an update on me, on life, on book that I'm working on. If you're on my email list, which you can join at stacyennis.com/join, you know I've been working on a book for some time now. It's actually been about 2 years in total, but I've been really pretty aggressively working on this the last several months. And so I'm at a finished proposal, nearly finished with the first chapter to include with the proposal as a sample. And I'm getting ready to send this out to the first agent. So I'm really, really excited about that. And otherwise, life is wonderful. Business is great. All is so good here in Portugal. If you didn't catch my Portugal update, the last episode I did was all about our life here in Portugal, whether this will be our forever home. So if you're curious, go back and listen to that episode because you'll get such a robust update on all of life and challenges and highs and all the things that are going on. I've also been traveling a ton. So the past couple months, I've been to the English countryside, to Zurich, and I just got back from Berlin last Friday. So lots and lots of travel, but I'm really excited to be grounded now for a little while, and no travel until probably the summer, although I shouldn't say that because it just seems like sometimes things come up. So for now, there's no travel till August, which is amazing. I'm recording this in early June, so that will be incredible to be home for just a couple of months. So with all that said, I want to move on to this week's episode on the state of equity, state of equality in publishing. Now, this topic, as I mentioned at the top, is of really deep significance for me, not just as a woman, but as somebody who really cares about equity. It's been a pulse of my life's work, actually, since my studies in college into I co-founded a women's leadership training company for several years. I co-founded with 3 other absolutely amazing women. And then there was also a period where I ran DEI trainings, diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's what that term means if it's new to you. And that was tough. I'll be honest with you. So meaningful, so important, such important work, but it really drained me a lot because I had to absorb pain. I had to absorb pain and I had to absorb a lot of negativity. And so that period of my life, it really was formative for me in anchoring to part of my life mission. Yes, it's books. I mean, my whole life has been in books, helping people write their books and share their stories with the world. But the other piece of that really is helping uplift voices that are not being heard otherwise or that are less likely to be heard. And so as I started thinking about that, I realized that I haven't really talked much about this on my podcast, even though in my client base, student base, I have a real focus on social equity projects. Yes, I niche in business and leadership, science, medicine, and social equity. But that social equity piece often overlays some of the other niches that I work within. So it really has been a super important part of my work for a long time now, but I strangely have not ever recorded an episode like this. So what I want to do today is I want to talk to you about the data. I did quite a bit of research before recording this episode. I have tons of notes on the screen in front of me because sometimes something can feel inequitable, but it's much better to be able to quantify it, I think. So we can feel one way, but then if we have the data, it almost validates that feeling and it helps us understand why we feel the way that we do. And I think it also puts it on us to do something about it because the way things are right now is not okay. It's just not. And if we have any sense of awareness about the inequity that exists, I think we have to use our voices, our buying power, and everything we can to help make things more equitable in the world. So let me just say, first of all, that when I gathered data, I struggled to find data from 2021 to 2023. It exists for sure, and I did find some. But what I found is that a lot of the data, the most robust data, was from 2020. And you'll understand why in a moment. But just know that as I'm giving quotes or quoting data, I should say, if it seems like a lot of it's from 2019 and 2020, that's because a lot of what's available is from those times. And then again, of course, I did my best to pull in as recent of data as I can. So I do want to anchor us back in 2020, and let's just frame why this was such an important time for awareness in publishing, just like in all of the other periods. Of course, in 2020, we had the murder of George Floyd, we had the Black Lives Matter movement, and we had a lot of just across the board, I would say, awareness generation around equality. That was not just with Black Lives Matter. Of course, that was so important, but it was also across all different backgrounds and types of people, including LGBTQ plus and all kinds of different people, which I love that. I love that that has been a point of awareness within the United States. Unfortunately, what I've found looking at the data is not a ton has changed. Some has changed, but not a lot in the publishing industry. So let's talk a little bit about what happened in 2020 and what's happening now. So in 2020, there was a movement within the publishing industry called hashtag publishingpaidme. And so what came about from this is authors sharing what they were being paid for their book deals. So as an example, there was a white author who shared that she had a $400,000 advance. She was a relatively unknown first-time author. Okay, so this is important to know. $400,000, first-time author, relatively unknown. A Black author who had won a national book award, massive award, that's a huge deal, shared that she had to fight for $100,000 advance. So huge discrepancy here. The white author is making 4 times what the Black author made, with arguably maybe a quarter of the credibility. I think it's really important to put this into perspective. When an author receives an advance from a publisher, most authors only pocket a third of their advance. So a third of that goes to taxes, roughly. A third of that is expected to go into marketing expenses. And then it's assumed that a third of that will go into the author's pocket. So it's what they make from the book. And of course, there's other things that the author can generate revenue from, but on the actual writing of the book, it's about a third. So put that into perspective with the Black author. She was essentially making $30,000 on this book That's hardly anything when you think about how long it takes to write a book, and how much effort and time and all that goes into it. On the other hand, the white author made about $133,000 in her pocket. So, really, really big discrepancy here. And then let's compound that with some data from the New York Times. The New York Times did an assessment on fiction books published by major publishers from 1950 to 2018. So, obviously, some huge changes in our culture within that time, but it's still a really important time frame to look at. And they found that 95% of the books, fiction books, were written by white authors. So huge, huge, huge number dominated by white people who are writing books. Now, let's talk a little bit about trends in publishing. So I was able to get a little bit of a range from 2019 to 2021. 76% of books published by Penguin Random House were by white authors. And this, I think, is really important to compare, because sometimes when you hear that, you're like, yeah, but this is me anticipating potential arguments. Okay. Yeah, but white people are the majority of the population. Yes, but only 60% of the population. So we have 70% of books by white authors, but there's only 60% white people in the US. So huge discrepancy there between who's being accepted and published versus what the actual data is for the population. And 74% of the publishing workforce is also white. So it's not just in the books, it's also in the staff. Now, Latinx contributors were the most underrepresented by Penguin Random House. So only 5.1% of their authors are Latinx, whereas this group represents 18.5% of the population. That's a huge discrepancy. Black contributors accounted for 6.1%, while they are 12.2% of the population. And interestingly, Asian contributors represented 6.9%, whereas they represent 5.6% of the general population. So that was kind of an interesting data point. Penguin Random House says they're committed to diversity, which I love to hear that. That's great. And actually, sharing those statistics, which I would hope they would anyway, but at least they are, that shows that we're moving in the right direction, because what gets measured gets managed or grows. So my hope is that with this visibility, we'll see better numbers. We'll see them to be more representative of the society at large. So what's important to keep in mind with this is that publishers say they're committed to diversity, which is great. That's great. I love hearing that. But we are not seeing fast enough movement, and we're not seeing data that reflects the actual population. Publishing as an industry is a slow moving behemoth. It really is. It can be very frustrating for those of us in the industry, but we need to communicate to publishers that we expect more and we expect better. And one of the best ways we can do that is through our buying choices. And we'll talk about that a little bit more toward the end of this conversation. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about female business authors. And this, to me, is such an important discussion. It's not something that I hear many people talking about. In the year 2020, of the year's 200 best-selling business books, how many do you think were written by women? So I want you to just pick a number, okay? 200 books, how many were written by women? 17. 17 out of 200 best-selling business books were written by women. And that's actually equal to the number of business bestsellers written by men named John. And as reported by Fortune, this phenomenon is not unique to books. In Fortune 500 CEO roles and other high-ranking positions, there are more men named John than women. in those roles. So obviously huge problem. That same article from Fortune reported that it's not new to see women underrepresented in these business bestseller lists. And rather than getting better, it's actually getting worse. So in 2018, it was 13%. We had 13% women in the bestseller business lists. And then in 2019, that dropped to 11.5%. In 2020, 8.5%. And one of the best-selling business books for 2020, written by a man, is about the disgraced Elizabeth Holmes, founder and former CEO of Theranos. And as this article reported, and I've seen this over and over again, it's not just that women are not writing the books, we're also not included in the books in a narrative that uplifts us. As an example, I was just at a conference recently, wonderful conference. I learned a lot, but in the all-day breakout that I did, there was a list of business books recommended, and there were quotations from business leaders throughout the entire day. I was there for a full day. Do you want to guess how many women were referenced or quoted in the main session of the conference and in the breakout session? Zero women, not one business book recommended, not one quotation, not one case study. This is a huge problem. If you are a man listening to this, thank you, first of all. And second of all, please keep this in mind. It's so important. And women as well, if you have an opportunity to present or to write about something and bring in examples, we have to be intentional about including diverse voices. That includes people of color, and that includes women. And actually, let me add to that a little bit, because the other groups we often forget about are differently abled people and LGBTQ plus people. So that's another piece that we really need to remember and keep in mind, is that we have a beautiful rainbow of diversity in our world. And if we only tell stories of white men or white people in general, and able-bodied people and heterosexual people, we miss so many opportunities to give examples of people that are different and beautiful. So I hope that will stick with you today, that we actually have a lot of control over our contribution to this broader narrative, even though maybe we don't have direct impact on the book list. Another point I want to make about just women in general participating in the man's, quote unquote, man's world. In September 2019, Forbes released its America's Most Innovative Leaders list featuring 102 founders and CEOs. Okay, quiz time again. How many were women? How many do you think? One. One was a woman. And I just looked at the 2022 list, and I did a quick review, so it's possible that I missed someone, but I clicked on every female sounding name on the list. And how many of those do you think actually ended up being female? This one might surprise you, or maybe not. Zero. I did not find one woman. Now, again, I didn't do a thorough review, so if you found that there is one, let me know. Let me take all this together and give you a point that I find to be extremely toxic. And I hope that this changes. And how this will change is, yes, going to be from publishers, but it's also going to be from us authors. Largely, business and leadership books by men are for everyone, right? I assume as a man writing this book that any and everyone will be able to implement this. I'm not just writing it for men. But the vast majority of the time when I speak with women, when I read books by women, and I have any kind of connection to a business or leadership book by a woman, it's written for women. Now, I love books that are specifically for me. I've read a lot of books targeted toward female leaders, women in general that have been really impactful in my life. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't write those books and that we shouldn't craft them for women, by women, for women. What I'm saying is that we need to create a landscape in which women can write for everyone, and that men are not reading books by women simply to understand women, but to understand business and leadership. And to do that, we need women to write books for everyone, and we need publishers to seek out those books. Now, one thing that's amazing in 2023 is that publishers don't get to be the end-all be-all gatekeepers anymore. We have a lot of power, and we can publish through hybrid and self-publishing. While I absolutely expect and want to see the traditional landscape change, the fact is that publishers follow the money. So if they're seeing that books by female authors and authors of color are being bought and that they're making an impact, they will follow the trends. What we need to see is we need to see these books and these authors representative of our wider census data. We need to see alignment with the fact that we have a population of 18 point something percent, and they're only getting, 5 or 6% of the representation. That should be in line with the data, with the census data. That's what I want to see happen. And I also want to say that I'm not discouraging white males or white people in general from writing. I mean, like, if you're looking at me right now, I'm like a white woman. I'm married to a white man. I have a white son and a white daughter. I also love Starbucks and Target and Lululemon and fall weather. So I'm like not even a hip white person. I'm basic, I'm like, I'm your basic white woman. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with who I am and the kind of the silly, very basic way that I live sometimes. So I'm not discouraging you if you're a white person listening to this, or if you're a white male. We need you. We need you to lift up other voices. We need you to buy books from people of color, from people of other sexual orientations, from other physical and mental abilities, and from other genders. It's really, really important. And the other thing that I'll say is if you're a voice of color, differently abled, different sexual identity, and different gender than the prevailing heterosexual white male, we need you. The world needs to hear from you. We need you to write books. We need you to give talks. We need you to host a podcast and write articles and share your voice. I'm getting chills as I talk about this because it's so important to me that your voice is lifted up. And this is why I do the work that I do. And it's why I specifically seek out people that align with this approach. And it's why I care so much. Yes, I love the books, I love the writing, but I want to make this world a better place. And to do that, we need it to be more equitable. It's not an option. It is a requirement for our world to improve. We need equity. So as a takeaway, one thing you can do today, right now, is get off this podcast, finish listening to the end, and go buy a book by an underrepresented voice. And when you're done, or if you've read a book recently or remember a book by an underrepresented voice, leave them a book review. Same with your podcast hosts. The reviews that you leave are truly, truly gold. I cannot overstate that. It means everything to an author because it helps them bump up in the algorithm. It helps them be seen, and it helps get their voice out there. So thank you for being here with me today for this conversation. I prepped a lot for this, not just with the data, but also just mentally and emotionally, because I really do care so much about this. My request to you as a listener or viewer or somebody on my email list in my community is that we keep the amazing and powerful, connected, uplifting spirit of this podcast and of the content that I create and the community that you're in And I can respect that we all have different viewpoints and different perspectives that we bring to things. But my request is that you listen and take this discussion for what it is, and hopefully find a way to support underrepresented voices going forward. Thank you so much for your time and energy being here with me today and for listening all the way to the end. I want to thank, as always, Rita Dominguez. I'd like to thank Catherine Fishman and Kim Foster. They all make this podcast possible, and I am so, so grateful. Speaking of reviews, please take a moment to leave me, hopefully, a 5-star review. It makes a huge difference. It lets me grow and scale this podcast and reach more listeners like you. So I really appreciate it. And that's it for me this week. I will be back with you before you know it.